Then the principal called to say that there had been an incident on the playground. He added that in all of his years of teaching, he'd never seen a child who was so disturbed and in obvious need of psychiatric medications. Words like conduct disorder, psychopath, and sociopath were used, which shocked her into a state of silent bewilderment. Now it's time for Puppets, Pupils, and Producers, a story of mind over matter. By the time her 10th anniversary approached, Cassie had worked on kindergarten, the dog pound, and Ollie's. She'd also filled in for several managers over the years and had been asked to do it again, but she had to decline because her custody and childcare arrangements revolved around her working afternoon shifts. And any time there was a change in her schedule, she'd have to deal with a tirade from Rich, who enjoyed the benefits of his ex-wife's income, but hated accommodating her so she could earn it. But in recent months, it was getting harder for her to attain her preferred schedule because other staff members wanted to work afternoon shifts too. As much as she didn't want to move units, it was the only option that avoided another legal battle with Rich. So she asked for a transfer to Unit 4, aka the Snake Pit, where everyone disliked working the afternoon shift. At the time, the multi-axial system, which considered 5 separate areas, was used for diagnosing a patient. Axis 1 indicated major mental disorders such as depression and schizophrenia. Axis 2 was for personality disorders and intellectual disabilities. Axis 3 for relevant medical conditions. Axis 4 for psychological and environmental stressors. And Axis 5 for the patient's overall level of functioning using the Global Assessment of Functioning Scale. Unlike the other units where the diagnosis of a major mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder was common, many of the patients on Unit 4 did not have an Axis 1 diagnosis and were essentially grandfathered into the system because they were admitted under legal standards that no longer existed. Although the terms psychopath, sociopath, and narcissist were all used, and sometimes interchangeably, the official difference was that antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, and narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, were included in the 3rd edition of the DSM, which was used by psychiatrists to make a diagnosis, whereas psychopathy or psychopath was a term used by psychologists and was not an official diagnosis. Most of the men on Unit 4 were diagnosed with ASPD, which got shortened to ASP or ASP, hence the unit's nickname of being the Snake Pit. Or at least that's what they told a patient, if he ever overheard a staff making the reference. Others were admitted long before ASPD became an official diagnosis in 1980, so they knew what the reference really meant. But they'd also been around long enough to know that if they wanted to report a staff for saying it, they might earn themselves a transfer to another unit, where the psychotic patients would definitely disturb their peace. While many might say the whole facility was a snake pit, the patients on the other units were more like a harmless garter snake who became neurologically distressed after being poisoned by pesticides. Or they were like a malodorous hog snake that hissed loudly but bit with a closed mouth and used the survival tactic of playing dead. Whereas the patients on Unit 4 weren't confused. Instead, they were like the king cobra, who relied on intimidation and made itself appear larger than it was. Or the boa constrictor, who liked to flex and use coercive control. Others behaved like the black mamba, who reacted with a flurry of strikes when cornered. Or the python, who waited patiently for the perfect opportunity to strike. Regardless of which snake behavior they displayed, they were predators, and everyone else was their prey. For that reason, most of the staff had to behave like a rattlesnake, who gave a warning when someone came too close and took action if they ignored it. Other staff were snakes in the grass, who crossed professional boundaries in ways that were every bit as manipulative as the patients they supervised. Despite wearing the benevolent type of trauma-tinted glasses, Cassie wasn't an easy target for the Unit 4 patients because she'd read every one of their files when she first started, so she already knew how dangerous they were. She'd also learned how litigious they could be because one of them lodged a formal complaint against her only weeks into her career. The incident occurred back when Cassie still worked out of the dispensary, where she'd respond to emergencies and calls from the units when a patient had a medical issue, which in this case did not involve a patient in respiratory distress due to a medical condition, but because he was so agitated about the secondhand smoke he had no choice but to inhale, which was why listening to his chest with her stethoscope, taking his vital signs, and attempting to diffuse him was, in his view, professional negligence, because he expected her to change the hospital's smoking policy immediately. While responding to a complaint before the ink had dried on her nursing license was challenging, the experience did teach her several things. Firstly, it made her more cognizant of the importance of cover-your-ass documentation, especially when you were dealing with snakes. The experience also revealed another snake in the grass, because the security assistant who'd called her knew the patient's motivation was political and not medical, so no matter what she did or didn't do, he knew the patient would file a complaint and didn't warn her. Along with being set up by her union brother, she learned that in the facility, the squeaky wheel did get the grease, which in this case led to the facility finally building sealed smoking rooms. And she learned about karma, because after filing 50 or so complaints, the College of Nurses put the patient on a very short list of people whose correspondence went straight to the paper shredder. Since Cassie and Rich were still married at the time of the investigation, he read the decision and knew the college didn't find a problem with her care. But it didn't matter, because Rich also knew how much she'd worried that her documentation wasn't as concise as it should have been. So he added it and her recent run-in with a nun to his smear campaign and began referring to Cassie as a psycho nurse, which didn't upset her because ever since she'd started treating him like a patient, his opinion of her no longer mattered, and she'd finally realized that, just like the patients on Unit 4, Rich would never take responsibility for the harm he caused. While she'd never ruled out the possibility of his attack, her priority was supporting their children, who'd become clingy, anxious, and in Jackson's case, aggressive, especially with his sister. Making the whole situation more difficult was the fact that their children didn't have the cognitive ability to understand concepts like custody arrangements, legal fees, or why their mother was putting on a brave face. What they saw had scared them. Just like Cassie, They didn't know whether it was going to happen again. They were obviously confused, and she was worried that in Jackson's mind, the mixed messaging told him it was okay to hurt his sister when he was angry or frustrated because he'd seen his father hurt his mother. Cassie also didn't think his starting school at 3.5 was helping, but Rich refused to discuss the issues because he'd have to admit choking her in front of the children was affecting them. And according to him in the court, Cassie had made the whole thing up. Then the principal called to say that there had been an incident on the playground with Jackson and a girl who he'd pushed over because he wanted the hula hoop she was using. After he shared the girl wasn't seriously hurt, he added that in all of his years of teaching, he'd never seen a child who was so disturbed and in obvious need of psychiatric medications. Words like conduct disorder, psychopath, and sociopath were used, which shocked her into a state of silent bewilderment. Before she responded, she thought about her brother and wondered if someone had used the same words with her parents, which then led to Stan being diagnosed and medicated. Then she thought about Sam ignoring Russell's maladaptation and wondered if she was blinded by a trauma bond with her son. Then she thought about the words the principal used and why he thought he was qualified to use them. So she decided she'd explain what kind of work she did, and he quickly ended the call. After she had a good cry and talked to Sam, she called Rich, who then called the principal himself. Not long after, her phone rang again. This time, it was Rich who reiterated that she was a psycho nurse because the principal denied everything he'd said. What she didn't know was that Jackson's teacher was hitting all of the kids in the class. But it didn't matter, because even without her knowing, the seed of needing to change his school was planted. All she had to do was figure out how she was going to do it without having to pay her lawyer. Hola, hola, peoples! If you're enjoying my fictional self-healing series, I'd love your feedback. I'd also love it if you'd feed the algorithm by following me and liking the post. And if you're stuck in the mindset and frequency of a puppet, and you'd like an energy session with me, please reach out and we'll make it happen.